The Dorkening and all affiliated shows are not intended for anyone under the age of 18. The following may contain discussions or scenes that have adult situations, graphic violence, nudity, strong sexual content, and graphic language. This show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Persons under 18 will not be admitted.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another killer episode of Still Toking With. 7 years in, you know who I am. It's right there on the screen somewhere. Yeah, right there. Yep, that's me. So anyway, I'm super excited about tonight's guest. Anytime we have a guest like this on that can give us some insight on shit that we want to know about. Let's put it that way. We'll just leave it right there. So the sparkly one himself is in the house tonight. I'll bring him in 1 second. Mr. Holman is under the weather, so he won't be joining us. We want to wish him the best of getting well soon and all that fun jazz. Jazz? Did I say jazz? Is that a segue? It is. Mr. Mark.
Good evening. Hi there. Yeah, we miss you, Jeff. Get well really fast. And welcome to the show. And I'm excited too. When people ask me sometimes, like, what is this show you guys do? My answer is the three of us, or tonight, the two of us, talk with some of the most fascinating people in the world. And boy, do we have a fascinating person tonight. A man who's been a journalist for way over 40 years, mainstream, under the table, author of books, and he knows stuff that he's going to share with us. I'm so happy to welcome to our program, Mr. Bill Conroy. Hi there.
Hey, glad to be here, folks. This is going to be fun.
You bet.
You say that now.
Yeah. You got to step off on the right foot anyway.
Right. Tomorrow he'll send a letter to the PR and be like, what the hell did you get me into? No, Not usually.
Not worried. Not worried. You guys are good.
So, yeah, first of all, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come up here, chat with us, chat with our viewers. Keep in mind, all our viewers out there, if we're not seeing your comments, you have to jump on one of the 7 major platforms, which is YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. If you jump on those, you can interact with the show. Otherwise, we don't see the comments. Anyway, enough about that. Yeah, so Bill, a veteran journalist, and I think it said investigative journalist as well. For
primarily, right.
Primarily investigative journalist, correct?
Yeah.
For over 40 years, man. Like, you must have seen some shit in 40 years.
Yeah. Some of it, like, you compartmentalize a lot of that stuff, and the older you get, it starts creeping out of its boxes. You know.
That usually happens to me about 2 a.m. Oh, that's not creeping out of my boxes. Oh, that's going to the bathroom.
Oh, no.
To give our friends out there who are watching and listening some context, when you first started doing investigative journalism, what was going on in the world? What were the first things you were looking into?
Well, I mean, actually, the drug war. I first started doing it for an alternative newspaper that a bunch of us founded in Milwaukee, and that was the era of Iran-Contra. It was in the 1980s, and so that was. I started out by covering like the inner city because that's where the drug trade was, and kind of trying to figure out how it worked. And I had, obviously contacts in the city, and I spent a lot of time in the ghetto. And, if I wouldn't do it again, I was young and foolish, but, it's like the drug houses where you'd walk in and you'd see like pounds of cocaine on the table. They'd be, the people guarding the doors were like 14-year-old kids with shotguns, and all the people coming in to buy the drugs were white kids from the suburbs. And, of course, it was mostly black folks selling it. And that's the time of the crack, cocaine, powder cocaine sentencing disparities. And that's probably what grabbed me most. I just saw, like, some of these guys get busted with slinging rock. They're going away for decades, right? Or at least a decade, automatically mandatory. And then, the kids that were buying it, their families had good lawyers, or mostly in the suburbs, they were doing the powder cocaine, and it might as well have been decriminalized unless they were dealing, right? Anyone dealing usually had problems. But so that's how it started out, and the Iran-Contra scandal broke about that, and I did dig into that, and there was like Eugene Hassenfuss was from Wisconsin for one thing, and there were some connections, so we did some investigative reporting around that, and then I was off to the races. I mean, this stuff. So my career kind of went from there. I got married, I had kids, and I had to raise a family, and that's my priority in life, is my family, and so I had to find a job that paid the bills, and that was the mainstream media route. And at the time, I got into business journalism, right? Because it paid well. It was basically office hours, like, which is unheard of in journalism, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And, it left me a lot of time to do the journalism I wanted to do on the side, which was nights, evenings, weekends, or what I meant, nights and evenings, weekends, and vacations. And, my wife was very supportive of it. I couldn't happen without that, because, she would have left me a long time ago for all the amount of time I spent on this. But, we're still together, have, 4 grown kids and everything. I'm lucky to be gotten this far, looking back on it, to be honest with you. I can't say enough for ignorance when you go into these things, because I certainly had, I guess, pounds of courage and tons of ignorance, and they kind of even out over time. Yeah.
Right. I mean, bringing you back to your start, like you said, in the drug wars and things like that, you must have found yourself in some pretty precarious situations being a journalist.
Yeah, I did. But I never thought of them that way at the time they were happening, or at least I didn't have like it didn't scare me from going back to it, because I guess I got out of it, right? So
right.
There is that. that's why I say, looking back, I
Yeah.
was, I made some stupid decisions and I learned from them, but just all it takes is one stupid decision. That's it. But yeah, I've been shot at, had guns held to my head.
I was just going to ask.
My office is shot at, and our office in Milwaukee was, it was firebombed. That was not for over the drug war, but it was, another matter. And yeah, the office in San Antonio, when I was writing about money laundering in the drug war that was shot at. Are these coincidences? I don't know. And I was tailed by cops in Juarez when we were there filming under the, basically serendipitously, luckily, yeah, but also, without telling Mexican authorities that we were there doing that, which technically is a violation of, you're supposed to get a visa and all that. But we just rolled across the border and, they have those green red lights at the border. At least they did back then. I think they're still there. I haven't been across that border in a few years, but it was just a luck. If we had gotten a red light, they would have stopped and checked us. And the camera guy sitting there at the time with his $10,000 camera hiding in the, back seat with the cameras in the back, he's hiding. Making sure the equipment didn't get seen as we were driving through Juarez, but until he popped up to film something. So it was that kind of trip. And we were going to visit a narcofosa, which at the time, that's like a mass grave that cartels, torture, murder people, and then they bury them. At the time, this is 2004. We were there in 2008 when Calderon, called in the military. So, and we were looking for some additional narcofosas, which we found, and we got tailed. And that was scary. That because I'd just been covering all this. I knew what could have happened, and especially trying to explain why we have the guy that was filming was a Peruvian journalist, and the other person in the car knew her way around Juarez, and she was an El Paso resident, and I'm from San Antonio. None of us had visas. The state cops at the time were the entire night shift command of the Chihuahua State Police was on the payroll of the cartel. They were the executioners in reality. They did other odd jobs for them. So that was scary. But I think whatever happened, they figured out we were gringos, and they didn't want to. We got out of town. I think long short is just wanted to chase us out of there. But you don't know that until you get out of there. So, I've had some close calls over the years, and on different stories I pursued, not even necessarily related to the drug war. Anytime you investigate organized crime or corruption, you can expect somebody, if you hit the mark at all, if you get over the target, you're going to get flack.
Right.
I'm going to ask for an opinion. The controversy with Iran-Contra was that stuff was happening that our government at that time wasn't being honest about. And there's been so much talk through the years about how much we're not being told. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican, just through the decades. Was it always like that, do you think? Or did there come a point where the government started getting cagey about letting their people know what's really going on?
Well, I mean, I think there's always been secrecy in government, but I think in our era, at least in my lifetime, it was kind of the growth of the national security state, and more things became classified, and once they're classified, it's hard to get them out of that from underneath that shell. And anything related to that's my big beef with the drug war. It's like what does national security have to do with cocaine? But yet today, I mean, Iran-Contra, that was all about cocaine. It was about crack cocaine and how the government was involved in the CIA not directly selling the drugs on the street, which is how they always try to discredit that story, is because they're operatives, which at the time were Contras that they were providing guns to. That was the CIA's role, is to get them guns so they could fight the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, which is a left-wing government, and the Contras were right-wing, and the Reagan administration. In fact, you can look at all U.S. politics. I don't care what president's in. They have always favored candidates in leadership in Latin American countries that are leaning, right? Because the leftists down there, on the political spectrum, they're shifted to the left of us in general. But, candidates from the conservative parties down there are more inclined to, play along with the U.S. capitalists up here, as opposed to, cause them heartburn. So that was the case back then. And so that, basically the CIA through Ali North, under marching orders from the National Security Council, had come up with this harebrained scheme, but it actually worked. To sell the missiles to Iran, that was the front end of it, and then this back end was the basically selling drugs in LA to raise money to buy arms to ship back to the Contras, and there was a whole supply network of covert pilots filing the guns and the drugs down. The drugs up and the guns back, right? And I talked to some of those in my book, and so that I think it's just been a slow creep of the democracy getting more and more encrusted with this national security state, where the government can decide what to let you know, and if they don't want you to know it, they just classify it. And then anyone that leaks classified information, in fact, one of the tricks often used is a whistleblower will come out and they'll call him to Congress to testify, and he'll spill all the beans. Then they'll classify the testimony. And from that point forward, even if the whistleblower ever talks about that information again, he goes to jail, right? Because so that's how they've effectively wielded the national security laws to, kind of control the message and narrative in the United States. And it's been used in the drug war heavily that way, I would argue.
As a journalist who is obviously so knowledgeable about all of this, can you pinpoint a moment in time when drugs became currency, when drugs were driving all of this stuff? Because it can't go back much more than
Vietnam.
Okay.
That's when, and we were actually, then we were using cutouts like Air America, CIA cutouts that were flying the drugs, and that was really allowing, because there was a robust heroin trade in the Golden Triangle, or a major opium center, and these armies that the U.S. was using to kind of shape the landscape there. The armies we lined up with, made money selling this stuff, and so we facilitated that, because it propped up the armies, and that's kind of the story we've seen with that type of interference or participation in the drug war with our government. It happened in Afghanistan. We all know those stories where they allowed them basically to turn the blind eye so they could grow the opium, because that was helping to prop up the government in Afghanistan at the time. So you couldn't, if you shut all that down, what's their source of revenue, right? That was a major source of revenue for the country. It's done, I think, more in Latin America for different reasons, although arguably the drug trade, it's like 600 billion a year. No one really knows, is helping to prop up governments all over the planet, including in Latin America. But
Right.
but I think there it's just got a little different flavor to it, because we're actually trying to geoform Latin America in our image. We have been since gunboat diplomacy, right? And the drug war just became a convenient vehicle to help us do that. So we can use it as an excuse to extradite the leaders we don't like. We're talking about that now. And there is clearly there is corruption. There is corruption in Latin America. The drug cartels are infiltrating into the government, but it works like organized crime here. And you can make the same argument here if you want to make that argument. It's take the bribe or take the bullet. That's and if you don't do either, we're going to assume you're against all of us. And that's the game. And so so you do have major corruption within Latin America, like let's say Mexico. But it doesn't mean the government itself, or the head of the government, wants that or is actively corrupted. Sometimes it has in the past. There have been, clearly that has happened, but it swings back and forth. But the corruption is still there under the surface. And people say, well, Mexico, they're the third world nation. They're not. They're they're definitely second world, if not approaching first. But the same thing happens here. Most of the drugs get, we shut the border down, right? That's the big narrative now, and no people are getting through, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's true. They shut the border down. They didn't shut commerce down. There's a lot of commerce coming through the border, and that's where the drugs are, coming through. They're put into that stream of commerce, try to a needle in a haystack. And just to make sure, when I was covering, the primary way they got these trucks across the border, the international bridges, at least in El Paso, Juarez, was by buying off customs inspectors and DEA agents and the rest of it. And it isn't like you have to buy off the entire, El Paso field of it office. No, you all you got to do is find one in the key spot, and that's all you need. One customs inspector on a bridge, and his shift. They wink at a nod and those are through, or they can at least pass you the intelligence on what bridge that's how it worked. And they were constantly, and they assumed a few loads would get caught. I mean, what got through more than made up for it, because drugs are a renewable resource, right? You can, the drug war is so insane. If we just take a step back, how many tons and tons and tons of drugs have we busted since this thing started? Right. And if anything, there's more drugs coming in, and they're cheaper. And that's because they bust some cocaine, you grow some more coca leaves, synthesize it, and move another load up, right? Certain players get hurt if their loads get lost, but there's rivals right behind them, pulling it through. So it's a very competitive market. And it is very much like capitalism unbridled. There are no contracts. So when somebody, breaks a contract, if you will, or doesn't keep their word, or crosses somebody in a way they consider unfair, here maybe we take them to court. Down there in a cartel land, you get killed. The bullet is the contract. So that's the difference. And we can see some of that too. If you legalize this stuff, you can create a regulatory framework for a number of these drugs that would greatly diminish and the problems that we have. We're seeing that with cannabis. I'm not saying you do that with every drug, but there are approaches we can take that greatly mitigate the harm and reduce it at least. And one of them isn't busting, loads of drugs at the border or anywhere else. Sure, get them off the street, but just realize that isn't putting a dent in the drug, the amount of drugs that are going to get across into the country at all. It just isn't. And, if we go after the money, that's a whole different story. But when's the last time you saw a bank brought up on criminal charges for money laundering, for cartel? I mean, almost every major bank operating in Mexico, both Mexican banks, major ones, and U.S. banks and some European banks, all have been busted for money laundering. Pay a fine and it's business as usual the next day. So they won't go after the money. It's too threatening to too many people that are, further up the food chain, way up the food chain. We're talking, And so it's keep the war at the street level. Lock up the black folks and brown folks. It's a good way to keep your population under control, and you want to keep control of the country. And sell a line that we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, and we're cleaning this all up. And the biggest thing about it I see isn't the racial component. That's just a byproduct of American history. That's a big thing to me personally, but I'm just saying the real reason that there's a motivation behind this is you get a headline, it makes you look good, you get an increased budget line. That means everyone gets more money in that particular law enforcement budget, or if it's an intelligence agency. So success brings you more money, and success is measured by drug busts. Of course, that's what you're gonna concentrate on. And
it sounds like nobody has any real skin in actually solving the problem, because everybody, including the problem solvers, are making too much money looking the other way.
Precisely. I could elaborate on that, but that's basically it. I mean, you had these huge initiatives like Plan Colombia and Plan Mexico, tens of billions of dollars, that were going to Mexico. But, there were contracts given to U.S. companies for the most part to supply, helicopters or whatever the heck they were using, armored cars and guns and et cetera. And, I reported at the time, ironically, that we were sending all these guns to Mexico to fight the drug war. And, the military and the state cops and the local cops were rife with corruption. And where are these guns really going? And we have no good. They claim to have good gun tracing. They don't have good gun tracing in Mexico. We claim to have fixed that problem. I think I read a report a few years ago about how but it's a joke. And when I talk to agents on the ground about it, it's like, think about a cop that's not crooked and he picks up a gun from a crime scene and he puts it into the database and it somehow links back to a cartel, sale to a cartel. And you don't think that cop is going to worry the cartels, some leak inside the Mexican pipeline or even the U.S. pipeline, it's going to come back to him. They don't really have an incentive to stick their necks out either, because the short of it is they get whacked. And,
right.
And, when you hear about cops getting whacked, you can't tell if they were crooked cops in the middle of a cartel turf war, or they were clean cops who got too close to something or crossed somebody, the wrong way and they get whacked. So, yeah, it's not a good situation down there. And that's why you've got 50,000 dead since, the Calderon era, 70,000 disappeared. It's incredible. And it's a country with, a third of the population of ours. We buy the drugs and the Mexicans pay the real price for the drug war, is how I see it.
Right. So folks, real quick, in case you're wondering what all this has to do, Bill has a new book out. It's called The Great Pretense, A Tour Through the Boneyard of the CIA's War for Drugs. So a lot of what we're talking about is from his investigative journalism over the years into his new book, which, if you're interested in, you can find in the show notes up above or down below, depending on where you're watching or listening to us. I just wanted to make sure we got that out there. So people kind of either watching this now, watching it later, or listening to it later understand that it's just not a show here. There's a book behind all this as well, multiple books, but that's the newest book. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Mark. Continue.
Yeah, I was going to pose it something. Let's pretend I'm Mr. Rogers, and we're going to travel into the land of the make-believe neighborhood. And Bill Conroy has been put in charge of making all of this better. Assuming you're not sent $1 billion in beard trimmers to bribe you, can any persons fix this, or is this so out of control we just have to live with it?
Well, you're not going to like this answer because it'll never happen. Yeah, we just quit buying drugs. I mean, everything's fueled by U.S. demand for illicit drugs, and I'm sure our listeners out there, unless you grew up in a shoebox, I would say a large percentage of them know what I'm talking about. They've run across the drug market in this country. And, you don't think about where is that. I mean, you wouldn't be enjoying yourself if you're thinking about how many people died to move the, cocaine across the border. Right. But it's the reality. Right. So I don't have a magic solution. I mean, I talked to a lot of folks that cover, that were involved in this on the law enforcement and intelligence CIA side. And they all have their own ideas. And the best kind of 3-point, or I'd say maybe let's start, see how many points I have. But first of all, I mean, addiction is real, and it's damn time this country gets real about it. We got a hodgepodge of programs. Some work miserably or not at all, and we're not modeling any of the good ones and kind of figuring a way to fund them and roll them out across the country. And particularly with the real hard drugs, the opiates like fentanyl now, which has made the news, but this has been going on with heroin, since I was a kid, overdoses. So, and that's a really, really tough addiction. I mean, try quitting cigarettes and multiply it by 10 and I've been trying to quit cigarettes off and on for years.
Listen, I just literally just lit one. So I completely understand the cigarette addiction. I've tried to quit numerous times over the years. I mean, that's the only bad habit I have now.
Yeah.
Let's watch his nose
I'll leave
grow.
I'll leave that one because we could do a whole show on all our bad habits and no one would care. But the thing is, I mentioned earlier, the one thing I think we need to do a lot better on, and would make a big difference, is to go after the money. And it's tougher to make cases. I know they'll argue that, but we've made cases, and big banks have gotten a slap on the wrists, and it's not the entire banks that are involved. It's key executives and also, folks in the government that help, grease the wheels on both sides of the border, whether they're at the low level or somewhere along the line, they know they're getting indirectly benefiting from illicit activities that are wandered downstream, so they look legit. I could bring up cases of people that buy money or buy property from known entities that are associated with criminal activity, and that's how the criminals launder their money, and you end up with a great deal on property. On a property, are you going to say anything? Do you even know, or do you suspect? And if you suspect, how hard do you look at it? So that's been going on forever. So that's nothing new. But I think if you crack down and went after the money in a very serious way, it would make a major dent in some of the cartel, at least the drug war stuff. Instead of giving money to the cartels via gun shipments to corrupt governments, let's try cracking down on the money. And that goes back. I think the other thing is guns. It shouldn't be a secret to anyone that 80% of the guns the cartels use are U.S. guns. The latest stats I saw a story. It was like the other, it bounces out across, but Israel's got a big role in the gun trade there too, or at least Israeli guns. How they get there is another matter. But most of the guns here, the saying is the cash in the guns go south and the drugs come north. And so if we actually got serious about, and I know that I'm a Second Amendment guy. I may I don't want to get into my politics, but I do believe in the Second Amendment because I grew up in Wisconsin, right? And everyone I knew was a hunter. They still are, and so I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about already illegal gun trade that, and you can buy a pistol in Boston and sell it south of the border to our cartel operatives for 5 times what you paid for it. And, you bring a big load of guns down there, you can make as much money almost as they do making, sending drugs north. So those are that's the 3-legged stool I see. And of course you still want to interdict the drugs where you find them, or where you but it's a matter of degree. Like how much of your resources do you put into this whack-a-mole game of busting, a couple 100 pounds of cocaine here. And I mean, the amount of money per, let's say, kilo of cocaine that's put into busting one of these kilos, it could go a long way toward doing something more effective. Right. And so,
in your opinion, sir, on the same note, in your opinion, the last 10 years, maybe probably longer, we have in the United States, state by state, area by area, been legalizing at least recreational use of marijuana. Right. Has that done any good in stopping the crime, or is it all baloney?
Well, as usual, it's complicated, right? I would love to say
easy questions.
I would love to say it was a panacea. I will say this: it has helped more than it's hurt, for sure. It's definitely helped because cannabis is no longer a major, cash crop, right? For the cartels, they switched. But the problem is then they switched to harder stuff, right? And other deadlier rackets. And there still is a gray market in the U.S. because here in Seattle, I covered this. The regulation is pretty tight, and it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But that means the costs for the recreational or for the legal stuff tend to be higher than the stuff you can buy on the street, right? And so there's always going to be somebody, whether they're growing it here and selling it on the street outside the legal structure, or it's being shipped up still from south of the border in mass quantities and then sold on the street to undercut the legal market. Some of that is still going on, but but it's far different than when one of the books you referenced that I covered was the House of Death case, Dispatches from the House of Death. That's a case where upwards of 54 total bodies that I found in my reporting, but in one house that I covered in particular was 13. People were murdered over, and it was over marijuana, right? I mean, they're not. It can still happen, I guess, in a huge load where they got a gray market payoff, but it's not happening anywhere over to the degree it was back then over marijuana. Now it's over different, meth and fentanyl and still cocaine. So yeah, I would say it's helped. I think from the point of view of incarceration in the United States, yeah, it's been a damn success. We're not locking people up for having a couple joints in their pocket anymore, right? In the states where it's legalized, and at all the cost of the taxpayer of that and the ruined lives out of that, it was insanity, right? And it was just, I'm glad that for no other reason alone, it was good to legalize it in this, in the half the states that have either medical or recreational.
You have also written about something about which I am completely ignorant, which is the use of drones coming from south of the border into our country, and I'm assuming used by the cartel people. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I can't even ask an intelligent question.
Yeah,
I know zero.
I can, and there's no definitive answer because I don't.
Well, I didn't ask a question. So.
Well, what I mean is my opinion. It's my opinion based on what I know. That's the other way of saying, I got my opinions. But just think about a drone, especially these small, cheap drones now. What is the maximum payload, right? And you're not going to be moving large quantities of cocaine anyway across the border with drones. And sure, you can move pills with drones, but there's a hell of a lot easier ways to do it. And yeah, you can in certain mountain passes, remote mountain passes where it's hard to traverse by land, you can conceivably use a drone repeatedly to drop off packages. But the longer you're out there, the more you're exposed. So the amount of drugs that are moving by drones is limited, very, very small percentage compared to the obvious way, right in front of our noses in our stream of commerce. But they are used for surveillance. I've been told that, so that it's one way to get up, and see what's happening. Let's say over the bridge is easier, or maybe in those remote areas to check out, if there's any border patrol around, so that if you want to move people or drugs across, you know what you're facing, right? But and as the drones get more sophisticated, who knows? But I mean, before drones, I was remembering stories about people using hang gliders to bring this stuff in, and but most of it, the large quantities, I mean, by the tons, is being brought in by ship, by truck, and basically by plane or jet. You buy a corporate jet. You get landing privileges somehow at a private air base, and it's harder to get across the border now because you got the transponders. I write about this in my book, how one of the operations that ICE used on the other side of the border, CIA is always involved. They were trying to track drug cartels, and they just put transponders so they knowingly sold planes to these cartel operatives. Many of them out of Venezuela at the time, right? This was CIA role. They were targeting Venezuela that far back, and then they, theoretically could track these planes, right? And ICE was saying it was our operation. We're there to bust the drugs, and they never put any of these transponders on the drugs. So this ran for 4 years. They sold dozens of planes to cartels who used them to transport tons of drugs, some of which came across our border, and no bust, not even an indictment. And people like saying they were tried to blame it on two rogue agents running. And I said, no, you don't run something that big that long with two rogue agents. So the point is, there's so many ways to get the drugs in the country. And what I covered, what I saw, I was right across the bridges in between the Walmart trucks, so there you go. And sometimes in a Walmart truck with in the panels, concealed in the panels. I remember stories of them being hauled in, like people that were into like racing trucks, right? They have these big racing truck trailers, and so there's this even better story why it's so hard to get this stuff. Out of Colombia, they found out how to turn this cocaine and fuse it into an acrylic product that could then be used to make vases and lamps or whatever. And so how are you gonna stop this? You're not gonna stop. So drones are like just a implement very small fraction of the total payload that's making it across our borders in terms of drugs. And plus, a lot of this can be now grown in the U.S. and it is, and also made in the U.S. There's meth labs still all over, despite the hullabaloo about busting the meth labs in Mexico. Yeah, great, but someone else has got more product to sell now, and so that's the game. And it's the question was asked earlier, like how do you stop? I don't think you ever can, as long as somebody wants to buy drugs. Enough people up here want to buy drugs. It's just too big a market. People are going to figure a way to they're going to take great risks. There's a lot of money to be made, and they are and do, and it will continue to do so.
Yeah, and we actually learn this in school, folks. It's called supply and demand.
Exactly.
And that goes for everything, and everything out there, but mainly drugs. If there's a demand, there'll be a supply.
Yeah, and that actually, is the mindset I brought to covering the drug war, because I was a business journalist too, during all this. Actually edited a paper for 20 years while I was covering the drug war, and I wrote about money laundering because it wasn't in their frame to write about the actual drugs, or the cartels per se, but yeah, it's just it's a business. It actually, for all the folks that are pro-capitalist, let's go laissez-faire completely all the way, just look at the drug war and you can see that's laissez-faire capitalism, with a bullet.
It also reminds me of like a magician, sleight of hand, that while they're doing something over here, you're not looking at what's going on over here. This is what was important, but they want you to look at this so you don't notice this.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I'm going to tell a 1-minute joke.
Mm-hmm.
Going across the border, at the border in Juarez, going to El Paso. That's the Mexican border right outside of El Paso, for those of you who don't know. And there was this young man who would cross over from Juarez into El Paso, just riding a bicycle. But he had this giant paper bag full of stuff. And they kept letting him in and letting him in and letting him in and letting him in. Months go by, and finally the security guard is in a bar in El Paso, and there's the guy. And he said, look, I'm not going to arrest you. I can't. I don't know. I just please, it's driving me crazy. What are you smuggling in those paper bags? He said, mister, I'm not smuggling paper bags. I'm smuggling bicycles.
Sounds about right. They're very sophisticated. That particular section border is where, because it's so close to San Antonio, I spent some time. They use like spy techniques, like honeypot traps. Like they'll send a woman across the border to ingratiate and get into a romantic relationship with a custom inspector, let's say, and they draw them in very small, and once they get them in, once they get them to pass a load, they're caught. They can't go back, right?
Because
that's it. They're captive. But these guys, can make, what is a border patrol? Back then they were making maybe 50 grand, 55 grand a year. You mean in a month they could make that, working for the cartels easily.
And it's gotten so dangerous there. Once upon a time, folks, if you were in El Paso, every hotel and motel had a bus that would take you over to Juarez. You could go shopping and eat dinner and enjoy Mexican culture. It's because it's right there on the border. None of them did that anymore. And if you ask at the front desk, don't go. It's too dangerous. Don't go. And the same thing is true at Nogales in Arizona and in Tijuana in California. All of these border places, if you go right over the border, it's unsafe now, which is a shame because they were gorgeous towns.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's overhyped a little bit. I mean, but at the same time, it's like being in any big city in the United States. You got to know the neighborhood you're in, or you're asking for trouble. But they are the major plazas, and that's why they attract all this, cartel. When the cartels are fighting each other, that's when they blow up and get real dangerous. Now, Juarez still, I mean, you're right. It used to be completely different. Then it blew up with the war on the cartels in 2016, the 212. That was Calderon. And it never really came all the way back down from that point. I mean, at one point, Juarez was as dangerous as Baghdad in the heat of that Calderon drug war. And that's when we, smartly decided to, go there, bring our camera across the border. But that's true. And the plazas are always going to be that way as long as we have a drug war, because that's the point where they go from being product to being sales, is right across that border, and there's that's where the money is, and they're going to find any way they can to get the product to market, and the byproduct of that is violence, and most of the violence that at least it's not they will go after. It's like it's organized crime. Boston is no a stranger to organized crime and Whitey Bulger, and these are the kind of people you're dealing with. Only there's a lot more of them.
I'm going to ask you a question I asked Dan Rather and Morley Safer. How do you do what you do? And you do it so well, by the way. And let me use the proper terminology. Not get whacked. How have you managed to do what you do without any harm to yourself?
Well, one thing is you are pretty safe as a journalist in the U.S. if you're in the U.S. and even to a larger degree than Mexican journalists when you're overseas, because the cartels aren't going to whack you. The odds of them putting a hit on you is pretty slim because it draws too much heat down on them. They don't need the heat. I mean, you'd have to be doing something that so threatened their operations. Now, that doesn't mean if and they're not like one ubiquitous thing. The cartels work with gangs on this side of the border, right? And they have their own distribution people that aren't, I guess they're technically part of the cartel, but it's not like a reporting relationship. It's all about who touched the drugs last and who got the money, who touched the drugs last, who got the money. And it's just and if that chain gets broken, that's where there's trouble. If the money or drugs are not, moving as they should, there's going to be probably some violence around that. And that can happen on this side of the border as easily as in Mexico. As a journalist, the journalists in Mexico are far more likely to be whacked. I just wrote a piece, and I get the numbers off a little bit, but like in the last, I think it went back 5 years. There were like 50 Mexican journalists murdered. Now, granted, some number of them probably were working for a cartel and the other cartel whacked them, but many of them were just good journalists who got killed, for doing their jobs. In the United States in that time frame, I think there's been 6 journalists murdered, none of them related to the drug war. So I feel I got a greater chance of getting murdered here in the United States as a journalist lately, especially in the last 10 years. Than I do in Mexico. But that's not to say you can't get crosswise with the wrong person and, or run into a wrong situation down there where you get into a neighborhood where you're just out of your league and they don't know who you are. You're just another white gringo down there that they're going to mess with because they think you're messing with them. Right. So, but there is no real, I think there's one journalist I know of and I knew him. That was murdered down there, and he was murdered covering a protest in Oaxaca, and he got close to the barricades, and it was a paramilitary with the conservative pre-party that shot him, right? It wasn't like over a drug situation. So yeah, if you're in the heat of something like that, and yeah, you got to, that's where you got to be careful. It's always a situation where you're in the middle of chaos, because all bets are off then, right? So I basically don't go running into chaos. I try to run away from it, but
Good man.
But I do find myself circling it a lot, right? And that's yeah. I mean, I'm you got to be concerned about it, and you got to take precautions. You got to have a network of people that can have your back, or at least know where you are and can provide some support. And I usually worked, especially on more dangerous assignments, with some other journalists, either in support roles or at least very nearby, where I could get help or get a bailout when I needed it. But when you do your surveillance of the area, so you know the neighborhood, you understand the territory and the land you're on. Any of those can be key lapses if you don't. So yeah, what is that? Life is 99% preparation, 1% jumping in the pool, right?
I'd mentioned a couple of names. I name dropped Dan Rather and Morley Safer. We could add Mike Wallace. We could add Woodward and Bernstein. I can't come up with a young person that I go, ooh, what great journalistic investigating they're doing. Are there young people you admire, or would tell them to come to you and go, hey, come talk to me, I want to help you?
No, I'll mention one name, Jose Olivares, who's a young U.S. journalist who has dual citizenship, speaks Spanish fluently. That was one of my handicaps, is I always had to work with somebody, generally because I didn't speak Spanish, right, when I was across the border. And God knows I tried to learn. I mean, I went through German, Latin, and Spanish, and none of it stuck, right? But he's very good, and he But the problem with that young journalists face today is, the mainstream media is, in general, is reduced vastly from the days when I was starting out. So finding a job in mainstream media is really tough, and even if you do, the number of ones that will give you the freedom to report this stuff is few, because it's very expensive, and there's no, the only payback is heartburn for these media owners, because you get sued, or there's a lot of liability, etc. So they have no, and it isn't necessarily the biggest readership garner. It can make a big impact, but how many readers read these long flowing exposés? And what's more, books. I mean, it's harder. People are used to 15-second newsreels, right? And so, yeah, it's the world's changing. I got to admit it. And if you don't stay on top of the world, it's going to change under your feet anyway. But I think that's part of the problem. But they're still out there, and they're just in this fractured media landscape. He's done some excellent work. He's very young, and there's people that he knows that I'm sure are just as good. And so I have faith that there are young and great investigative journalists that are going to come up here yet. But I can't have as much faith in what the media landscape is going to look like for them to work in, and to get this stuff to readers. And readers get used to what they're fed sometimes. If they don't know any different, that's what they just expect. So
as you mentioned, the world has changed,
right?
There are barely any magazines left. There are cities that don't even have a newspaper anymore. Radio, terrestrial radio, is going away quickly. And the CBS, NBC, Fox, those people, they're all being owned by one company. I don't know why there isn't a huge geschrei out there over the monopolies that own our media, because once upon a time, an investigative journalist was in competition with 10 other papers. Let's use newspapers. Today, the competition is almost all bought and paid for and working for the same team.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, with the world changing, I think investigative journalism is changing with it to bring it more to platforms like what we have here.
I know
Where
somebody
you're
working
independent. Yep.
I know somebody
You know.
working for BBC. I had the same discussion with. She's a young journalist, and she was trying to convince me how TikTok can be used as a platform, even for investigative journalism. Now, and they're actively working that. Now, you want some feedback behind the platform. You can always say, for the full story, go here. But as the even telling that story, they are now these young journalists are learning to use definitely multimedia approaches, but even to package investigative pieces into smaller nuggets so they can be digested and then built upon, right? And maybe even over time built on, instead of all blasted out in a newspaper page like we used to get when we were young.
Right.
So yeah, I believe it can be done. But AI is going to throw another wrinkle into it, right? And that some of that good, some of it bad. And it's like any technology. And media's been like this forever since we went. Media was transformed by, first of all by the Gutenberg press, but then by the penny press at the turn of the century, when suddenly mass available, cheap newspapers were available to the masses. Before that, they were much more expensive. Slide forward, there were various, technologies, but usually the big ones come along every 30, 40 years. It was desktop publishing, completely transformed my era. That's how we were able to start a newspaper.
Right.
And, then came the internet. Again, transformation. Blogging era. That's again, I was coming up in that age, and then from the blogging era, when internet got faster and broadband got more broadband got to more people, the video era that we're still in, really. And AI is going to change that game again. And I don't know if it's the next 10 years or next 20 years, but we don't even know the media products that are going to be rising out of that, that are going to be popular. So yeah, if you get into this business, it makes sense. You're covering news. News by definition has changed. Why do you think your own industry is going to be subject to the same rules, right? So you do have to. You can't whine about it and lament. I mean, I lament and I whine, but it doesn't do any good. No one cares. So you got to move forward. You got to figure a way out. And so at this point in my career, it's like what doesn't change fundamentally are the reporting techniques, right? The media presentation will always be changing, or you got to adapt to it. But there's still some fundamentals that you have to know about reporting and researching a story, right? How to vet it, how to make sure it's accurate. If you care about such things, in investigative reporting, it's key. How to build sources, develop sources, how to protect sources. All those are independent of the media that you use if you're doing it right. And those are the lessons that I learned many of them the hard ways that I can then pass on to younger reporters that are interested in listening to an OFAR like me. And I take every occasion to do it because I don't understand TikTok the way they do. Maybe they can teach me something about that. So,
right.
We are starting to run out of time. And I know Ben wants to mention your books one more time.
Go ahead.
All right.
No,
well,
I said Ben wants to.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, just check the show notes up above or down below, depending on where you're watching or listening to us. The links to his books are there. It's that simple.
Cool.
The names, the links, it's all there. If you're interested in it, which why wouldn't you be? Get a copy or 2 or 10. It's that simple.
Yeah, you guys, I use this. You don't make money on books, really. I really just want the book read. But to the extent I do make money, it gets poured back into reporting and journalism. And I'm at the point in my career where if I was just trying to make money on this now, I would be not talking to you from my house. I'd be talking to you from the streets. So I'm not doing it. I'm not. You can buy it or not. I'm not really in for the money, but I am in it to get the books and to have this history down so people don't have to repeat all
the story needs to be told.
Yes.
Yeah. And the best way to get the full story is to read the book. Because I'm sure we've covered quite a bit in this hour, but we didn't even touch on a lot that's within those books. So
That's true.
It's kind of, it's very simple, people. You know, we can only give you so much with our investigative journalism here. You know,
you guys do a good job, I think. Yeah, I like the format here.
Thank you. But we love having you.
But to get the full story, or the full story that Bill is telling, you got to get the book. I mean, it's I don't even know how to explain it any other way to you. Not to you guys. I mean, to our viewers and our listeners. You know, if this is something that interests you, there you go. It's you know, it's kind of, that's the way it is.
And I'm very accessible too. If folks do end up buying a book and they got questions or they want to complain about something that was in it, either way, I'm used to that. I was an editor for 20 years. I have a thick skin. And
see, the way I look at it is, folks, if you're going to complain about the book, then, you know, oh well. But if you want to reach out to him and you have a question, the question should be, how much are you going to charge me to autograph it when I mail it to you?
Thank you. All right. I like you guys even more now. That's good.
And that's kind of how it is, you know. If you're going to buy the book, you read the book, but then you're going to buy the second book to have it autographed so you don't read it and it goes in your library. See, I have a library over there of autographed books that have never been read. Well, that's not true. There's a few that have been read because there's only one copy. But check the show notes up above, down below. All Bill's information is there. Links to his books. And hey, like he just said, reach out to him. That's in the show notes. Mr. Mark, do you have a last question?
I have.
For this amazing guest.
I have and he is an amazing guest. I agree with you. So, Bill, you're brilliant, you're talented. What's the next thing you want to investigate? What gives you a journalistic boner?
Boner?
Yeah.
How did I know?
Yeah. Well, I just know the next thing I want to investigate, I don't want to get in trouble with my wife, right? So if we want to go off on that, but no, that was a bad joke, guys, right? But
I'm smiling. Go ahead.
Here's what happens. I can sit here honestly and say right now, I'm not 100%. You know, there's the real next question to me is, do I do another book on the drug war? I mean, I've left a couple things off the table. You know, I've covered the drugs. I've covered, do I cover the guns? Do I cover the money laundering? But in order to do a book like this, you got to have real passion about it because it's a year-long project. And, you know, this book just came out in February. So I'm really in that process now. I don't even know if it's going to be fiction or nonfiction because I've written 3 fiction, 3 nonfiction now. But I don't know yet. If I did, I would tell you. I'm still exploring that. In fact, I was just thinking about that last night. And I take time every day, like when I'm walking my dogs and stuff, and unplug and just kind of try to meditate about what's grabbing me, what really is interesting to me enough to spend a year on. But it also has to, at the same time, be interesting enough to potential readers.
You know, I bet with your experiences, you could write an awesome murder mystery.
I don't know. I probably could take a stab at it, but I will. You know, I already know the mystery, and I'm wondering if that'll keep me interested the whole way. So I've got, I'll know the answer. but actually, that is one that's crossed my mind. I'll throw this out to you, but I don't like writing real deep historic fiction like decades ago. But this is the only one that might grab me because you got to do so much research on the period, right? And you can't make that. But I had a believe it or not, on my dad's side, where Irish, he came out of Chicago and then he moved to Wisconsin as a kid. But our Chicago bloodline on that side was, part of, Irish mobs in Chicago. And there's a real interesting history about, how do you come out of that to, he was a railroad engineer, but he walked away from it all, right? Because they were going to set him up. No way. I want out. And his mom did too, because that's my grandma. So how do you walk away from it? I don't think it happens often, but they did. But they had to move far enough away from Chicago to get out of it. But the tragedy still plagued him. I had he would have been a great uncle, but it would have been my grandma's, cousin, who she was very tight with, who was murdered by a serial killer here in Seattle. I didn't even know this before I came to Seattle. I found all the news clips and everything. This is in the 1950s, right? Wow. So there's some interesting intersections between my past, which I didn't even know all the details of at all, and how I ended up covering this stuff that kind of fascinate me. Like, what is going on there? That, am I trying to purge some demons from my ancestral bloodline here? I don't know. But point is, there's something there, and I'm playing around in my head, and that might be what it might lead to something like that.
That would be a cool read.
It would. I'm sitting there going, yeah, do that one. Do that one.
Yeah, well, thanks for the feedback, because I haven't articulated it. Now I'm telling it on here. I don't know. I've been keeping it in my head. But
no, I think it would be a cool read, to people's ancestral history, when it has something good, like not good, but a good storyline like that. That's a good read. That's a good read.
It has a happy ending. I'm alive, right?
right. To this day, still.
Still.
So my last question for you is, we've heard a lot about your investigative journalism and things that you've covered, but what is the one thing that Bill really geeks out about? Like, we've had people on that geek out over history. They geek out over, astronomy, sunken ships. Is there something that outside of journalism that you just really, you're like, yeah, that's me?
I better watch what I say here. I'm going to say it. The Green Bay Packers, baby. I'm an NFL football fan. I enjoy my Sunday football.
Why would you be afraid to share that?
Well, because, I'm talking to folks out there in Boston, land.
Well, Jeffrey Mark actually is in Palm Springs.
Okay.
So he's a California boy.
This is true. We are all. You're right. Yeah.
But
it was kind of a joke. It's kind of a joke because
right.
there's rivalries, but they're at least friendly rivalries. And no one.
Listen. I love football, and I'll tell you, man, I loved watching Brett Favre back in the day.
Yeah, so did I. Even though he turned out to be a big loser.
And that's why I said back in the day.
Yeah,
so a good team, or a good quarterback, or a good player, and it doesn't matter who the hell they play for in my eyes. If they're good, they're good.
You're right.
So,
you're absolutely right.
But now if you want to get into hockey, hockey's where we can get into a tussle over here. But
yeah, you sound like I'm not as close a hockey fan. Actually, my niece is married to someone whose brother plays at pro level. He played up and down. You know how that goes. He played some games with the Blackhawks. He's a goalie. So I'm getting infiltrated into the hockey culture a little bit through that. But I don't, I was the standard. I grew up playing baseball and football, right? And, that was, and I've had to learn through my kids soccer and, like I said, the hockey. So that's how,
But I still want to know, investigative minds want to know, why is a name spelled Favre pronounced Favre?
French, I guess.
No, it's not how it's pronounced in French at all.
I don't know, man.
I speak French. That's not it.
Okay.
Listen, R-O-Y, Roy.
Yeah, Cajun French, maybe. Huh? That who knows? Who knows? But there's my name gets butchered, and I, all the time. Right? It seems like the simplest name in the world.
They can't pronounce Bill?
No. Thank you, Conroy. You would be surprised. It's Conroy. They never. It's almost invariably I'm correcting the last part of it. But I'm sure we all have names that we've all dealt with that. But I can't answer that question. But I do. Yeah, that's where on a Sunday you'll find me in front of my TV with a beer watching the games.
Well, you deserve it, sir, because you give us 6 other days of your great talent, which we appreciate.
Right. All right. Well, it's good talking to you. Always. Yeah.
So, Bill, when you're not watching football or investigative journalism or hiding from bullets or whatever you might be doing, where do you like to interact with people? like on social medias? Do you have a favorite social media platform, like a Facebook or an Instagram?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm on all of them. Facebook, of course. And that's allows you to use the most words. So it probably tends to be more of a writer's favorite. But I also like, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok now, and I'm on, X, although I don't use that as much. It got a little bit toxic for a while, and it just didn't seem like it was worth it. Although it seems to maybe be coming out of that phase a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. But, of course, Blue Sky, Threads, all the major ones. I'm not on, some of the, ones I would consider way off on the fringes, just because I don't want to deal with that.
Right.
but yeah, the main ones I'm on. Yeah.
So folks, make sure you check the show notes up above or down below, because those links are there as well. Mr. Jeffrey Mark.
That is I.
Same question for you.
Yes, sir, my friend. Jeffrey Mark, as it is spelled below here, for those of you who are listening, GEOFFREYMARK, at Facebook, at Instagram, it's Jeffrey Mark Showbiz. And by the way, as long as I have your attention, we have another show, Ben and I, GPE, Jeffrey Mark Plays Ella. Every week, I play the music of the incredible Ella Fitzgerald on a theme, and then give you insider stories about how the music was made, about the recordings, about Ella. And that comes out every Sunday in time for brunch on the West Coast. So please go looking for that on the very same platforms and channels and places that you're either watching or listening to us all over the world. And we have a GPE page on Facebook if you want to talk to us there. And I'm sure if Jeff Holman were here, he would tell you all about Still Toking and their stuff, but I'll let Ben do that this time.
So yeah, you can check us out at stilltoking.com. Just go to stilltoking.com. It's easier. Yeah, Toking with the Dead on Facebook, Still Toking Productions on YouTube. All the links are on stilltoking.com, along with all these amazing shows, 7 seasons of these shows. You can find them there. You can find them on YouTube. We want to thank Bill for coming out and hanging out with us this evening, telling us
my pleasure.
a little bit about his life in investigative journalism and some of the things that he's really passionate about. To all our veterans and first responders, we want to thank you for doing what you do so people like us can do what we do. Stay safe. We'll see you next week. We're out of here.
God bless. Have a happy.